If you're looking for a new fishing rod and you walked in a sporting goods store and you felt completely overwhelmed, maybe even a little confused, I don't blame you. It's absolutely insane the amount of fishing rods that are on the market today. In this video, I'm going to break down the basics of fishing rods. We're going to discuss why some rods cost $30 and some cost $230. And at the end of this, I'm going to explain why you don't really need to stress too much about the fishing rod you buy. First off, let's talk about the two main types of fishing rods. The first one is a spinning rod. As the name suggests, it works with spinning reels. The second type of fishing rod is a casting rod, and a casting rod works for bait casters, conventional reels, and spin cast reels. The way you tell the difference between the two, a spinning rod is just like this. The spinning reel goes on like that, and it is flat here, and it's flat here. A casting rod will have a small piece of plastic or metal hanging out here with a trigger-like look so that you can hold it easier when you're using a bait caster. The other main way you can tell is the first ring on a spinning rod is going to be much larger than that of a casting rod. And you definitely want to make sure that you get the right one, because if you were to put a spinning reel on a bait casting rod, there would be a trigger sticking up here and it would just absolutely be in your way. You don't want that. The eyelets would also be much smaller, and that is going to screw up your casting accuracy on a spinning reel. So make sure you get the right rod for the right reel. Next thing you need to know about rods is they have two different kind of strength ratings. They have power and action. Now, I've heard these called different things, but here's what you need to know. The power of the rod tells you how strong the main shaft of the rod is going to be, how much flexibility it has. The action of the rod is going to tell you how much flexibility is in the tip. Generally, both of those ratings, the power and the action, are going to have ratings that go from like extra light to extra heavy. And the ratings of the rod should be printed somewhere along the shaft near the handle. Is generally where they put them. If you do not see the specs on the fishing rod when you go to the store, that is a red flag not to buy it, y'all. So the power of the rod, the flexibility of the main shaft is what you want to focus on first. The rating you want to look for is going to depend on the type of fish you're targeting. So if you're targeting big, heavy fish, you're going to want a heavy duty rod. If you're targeting light, smaller fish, you're going to want a lightweight rod. For big weights and heavier lures, you're going to want to get something that has a medium heavy shaft. The action of the rod is the flexibility in the rod tip. This is a medium heavy. It doesn't actually really have much flexibility. The action rating is something like medium, moderate, or fast. And that's going to tell you if it's a fast, it's going to have a lot more flexibility in the tip. Something that's a moderate or slow is going to be very stiff like this one. For smaller fish and bass and panfish and crappie, the action of the rod tip is going to matter a whole lot, because you're going to need to make sure that you can actually throw the baits you're tossing. So if you're throwing giant chatterbaits or giant swim baits, you really don't want to have a super fast rod tip, because you're not going to be able to get the right accuracy with those baits, and you're going to struggle to cast them out and possibly snap the line off when you're casting them, because different lures are going to act differently with different rods. So it may take a little practice to find one that's actually right for you. Okay, let's talk about the lure weight. So when you see a rod out there that has a lure weight of, say, 2 ounces, that means they're telling you that 2 ounce weight, whether that be actual bait or lures, that's the recommended weight usage for that rod tip. That's the flexibility they're kind of recommending that you stick to. So if you see a lure weight of 2 ounces or less, that's going to be really good for like panfish and bass fishing. If you see something that's rated between 2 ounces and 5 ounces, that's a heavier duty rod. That's going to have a sturdier body to it. And if you see anything that has a lure weight over 6 ounces, now you're getting into monster fish territory. You're talking about your 40, 50, 60 pound fish and up. All right, if you made it this far and I told you something useful, go ahead and hit that like button for me. That really helps me out. You should also see a line rating listed on the rod. Make sure you pay special attention to this. It actually matters quite a bit. The lighter the line rating, the lighter the fish you should be targeting with that rod. A good rule of thumb to think about it is if you see a line rating of 10 pound, you should be targeting 10 pound fish. If the line rating is up to 20 pound, target 20 pound fish. If the line rating is up to 50 pound, you should be targeting 50 pound fish. You get the idea, right? And the line rating generally goes hand in hand with the power of the rod. So the stiffer the rod is, generally the higher the line rating is going to be, because stiffer rods are made for bigger fish. But one of the reasons you really want to pay attention to the line rating is because you can actually find a 7 foot long medium heavy rod that has a line rating of 10 pounds and the same 7 foot medium heavy rod that has a line rating of 50 pounds. And those two rods are going to be completely different rods. Even though they are both medium heavies, they are totally different, and you should be targeting different fish with each one of those rods. One of the main ways that rods get broken is because people are not using them for their recommended usage. You'll see people out there that have a medium heavy with 20 pound line rating, but they're out there trying to catch 50 pound fish. It puts a strain on the shaft of this rod. It puts a strain on the rod tip. Those rods were not built strong enough to handle that kind of weight. but people do it anyways because they either just don't know or they don't care. That's going to start deteriorating the fibers inside of that rod, and generally that's one of the main reasons I see broken rods out there, because they keep continuously abusing it, using it to try to catch fish that it wasn't rated to catch. So definitely pay attention to the line rating when you're looking for a new rod. Next, you're going to want to look at the length of the rod. So in general, short rods are made for more accurate casting. Long rods are made for long distance casting. Unless you're in the short, then you're going up to like 13, 14, 15 foot rods. And you do that for a couple reasons. Is one, you can cast a little bit farther, but two, it's going to keep your line out of the waves, out of the surf. So if you're freshwater fishing, 7 to 8 foot is a pretty good size rod if you don't have to cast that far. If you're fishing from a boat, 7 to 8 foot rod's plenty. Again, a 9 to 10 foot rod is going to give you extra casting ability, but they generally become more cumbersome than they're worth. You also need to be conscious of like where you are fishing. If you're fishing somewhere with a lot of overhead trees, you are not going to want to have a 9 foot rod out there, because now you're trying to just dodge trees. So when it comes to a 1-piece or a 2-piece rod, I'm just going to kind of say it doesn't really matter in this day and age. The rods are typically built well enough. The only difference between them is a 2-piece rod you can obviously break down and travel with it easier. If you're getting surf rods, they generally always come in 2-piece rods because it's really hard to travel with a 15-foot stick hanging out of your car. Other than actually transporting them, 1 or 2-piece doesn't really matter. Okay, when it comes to the material of what the rod is made of, this is where things can get really, really confusing. Rods can be made out of fiberglass, composite, e-glass, graphite, a combination of the two. Some manufacturers have their own proprietary materials, but I'll be honest, unless you actually look it up on their website, the rods don't generally tell you anywhere on here. It may be listed on the tag, but they don't actually tell you what the rods are made of. And if you're wondering why there's so many different materials out there, it's for one specific reason. The rod manufacturers are trying to make the strongest rods at the lightest possible weight. So here's the easy way that I kind of look at the materials of the rods. Fiberglass is the absolute cheapest kind of rod out there, and anything that's made of a combination of that or not made out of fiberglass at all is going to be more expensive, but it's also generally going to either be stronger or lighter than a fiberglass rod. Now, I wouldn't spend too much time agonizing about what the rod is made out of, the material it's made of, and I'll explain to you why. Basically, your fishing setup consists of the rod. It also consists of the reel. It consists of the line you're using, the leader. If you're using a leader, it consists of your hooks, your swivels, even your swivels on your lures. And all of these items also have a breaking point. They also have a maximum strength. And the odds are you're actually going to bend out the hook, break a swivel, break a line, or break the reel before you actually break the rod. So in my opinion, if you're going to spend money on upgrading gear, I would make the rod the last thing you upgrade. Get something durable and cheap. Upgrade your reels, upgrade your hooks, upgrade your swivels, because those are the items that when they break, you lose the fish. If your hook breaks, you lose the fish. If the swivel to your leader breaks, you lose the fish. If your leader snap, you lose the fish. If the line snap, you lose the fish. If the reel breaks, you're going to have to use your hands to hand line it in, and that can be dangerous. If your rod breaks, you're inconvenienced. You can generally still pull in the fish. It generally doesn't break every single guide off. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt. It's still able to land that fish. That's why I don't really tell you to worry too much about what the rods are made out of. They're all pretty strong nowadays, and there's so many other components that could fail when you're fighting a fish. I would worry about upgrading those. But the material of the rod does play a significant factor into the weight of the rod and the price of the rod. So that brings us to cost. Why does one rod cost $30 and another one cost $230? A big part of that is the material. Obviously, stronger, lighter weight material other than fiberglass is going to cost more money. The length of your rod, the longer the rod, the more material it takes to make it. The guides on your rod, that's also going to matter. Some people use really cheap ones. Some are solid one piece. Some have inlaid ceramic rings. The material that your rings are made out of and how many rings are on the rod and how they are engineered along the rod, that's also going to be a big factor in the cost. And the reel seats, those are going to drive up cost as well. This is a really simple, just plastic screws on right here. Some of these will have 2 metal rings here, 2 metal rings there. These will be made out of solid metal, not out of plastic. That's going to drive up the cost of a rod. Also the handles where you hold it. This one is just a solid foam handle. Some of these will have actual ergonomical cutouts. Some will have holes in it for breathing. And basically what it does is it allows your hand to grip it more comfortably, more naturally, and fatigue less over time. So anything like that's going to drive up the cost of the rod. And of course, just like any other product in the world, brand name. Brand name is definitely going to affect the cost of the rod, okay? And I strongly suggest that you pick a brand name that you know, or at least one that you've heard of. So how do you pick the right rod for you? So you have to consider how often you fish. If you only fish once or twice a year, you probably don't need a $200 rod. If you fish every other day and you do repeated casting, you are probably going to benefit from a more expensive rod. It's just going to feel better. It's not going to fatigue in your hand, and it's probably got a big, nice warranty on it. But if you're only a casual angler, I wouldn't recommend spending a whole bunch of money on a rod. You're not going to really notice the difference. And quite frankly, nowadays, the cheap rods still hold up pretty well. So let me segue that way into fishing combos. We've all seen them. You go to the store, the rod, the reel, and sometimes even with the line on them. Combos are really, really good if, like I said, you are a once or twice a year fisherman. Great, they're going to work out for you. But if you're an avid angler, someone who goes out once a week to fish, I would recommend staying away from the combos. So I don't have any evidence of this, but if you look up a reel online and you look up the rod online, they're generally going to be like double the price of the combo. So you got to ask yourself, how are they selling the combo, the pair of them, so cheap? My guess is, from a business standpoint, they found a way to cut corners, whether they're going with cheaper made gears, different rod materials, something. It doesn't make any sense for them to sell the combos that cheap unless they found a way to cut corner manufacturing costs. Again, I don't have any evidence to back that up. Like I said, if you don't fish that often, they're probably going to do you just fine. I've used them before, but I would suggest you buy them separately if you plan to do a whole lot of fishing. The three main reasons I see rods break are: one, you're fishing in a way that rod was not made for. So basically using a lightweight rod and throwing big heavy baits, using a rod that's rated for 20-pound fish and trying to catch 50-pound fish, eventually that breaks down the rod and they will snap. People will slam a rod in their car door, in their tailgate. And the third way I always see it is there are some really, really cheap rods out there that are made out of a hollow fiberglass material that looks kind of like a straw. And those are just not really made that well, and they break pretty quick. So if you're like me and you like multi-purpose rods, you don't want to go buy a rod for every single species of fish. General rule of thumb, a 7 to 8 foot rod that's a medium that can hold 10 to 20 pound line, 2-ounce lure weight. That's going to be a solid kind of universal sized rod. You'll be able to put on up to 2-ounce chatterbaits or even tiny swim baits and go for bass. You'll also be able to put on like several ounces of cut bait or carp bait or leads for catfish and still pull in some like 20-30 pound catfish with those rods, no problem, without actually straining them too bad. Okay, so if I was to walk into a store right now to buy a fishing rod, what do I need to know? I need to know what fish am I targeting, how big are they, and what is the weight of bait and lure I'll be throwing out there. So let's say I wanted to go catch some 5-pound bass. I would probably go out and I'd find a 7 to 8 foot rod that's a medium heavy, and it needs to be rated for at least 5 to 10 pounds because that's the size of the fish I'm targeting. And for larger bass like that, I'm probably using much larger swim baits or crankbaits or chatterbaits, which have some weight to them. I'll probably want to find something that has a 2-ounce rating and a moderate action tip. That way when the fish strikes, I can get a good hook set and the rod tip won't be too flimsy and it won't snap on me. Now, if I was gonna go in there looking for a 100-pound catfish, I'd probably, again, want a 7 to 8 foot rod. I would probably want a medium, at least, more likely a heavy rod with a heavy action tip on it so that it doesn't have much flexibility. That thing's gonna need to be stout like a broomstick. I wanna make sure it has a lure rating of at least 6 ounces and at least 50-pound line on it. Otherwise, you are just unprepared for a 100-pound fish. All right, I hope that helped you out. I hope you learned something. I'll see you on the water.